Well, hey, everybody, Mike Griffith here. Welcome to today's special presentation on Dog Nation. Some breaking news: JT Daniels has committed to play for the Georgia Bulldogs. You remember earlier today, Jeff Sentell with the article that there was a buzz. Well, that buzz turned into a loud clap of thunder and a strike of lightning as suddenly the Georgia quarterbacks room is overflowing with quarterbacks seemingly. And today I want to bring in a good friend of mine, a former coworker, Ryan Young. He covers Southern Cal for the Trojans out there for the Rivals Network. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to be here with you, Mike. Good to see you.
Yeah, I didn't expect to see you under these circumstances. It's good to know people, because I called you earlier today and I said, hey, man, how good is this JT Daniels guy? Because it looks like he might be coming here. And you said, Mike, when he went in the transfer portal, not everybody was convinced that he would actually transfer out if they didn't get this one-year waiver thing passed. But here we are. So I guess I'll ask you, how surprised are you to see JT transferring out, knowing that he still has to apply for a waiver to get immediate eligibility?
Well, what we don't know is what he's been told, what his family has learned. Maybe they've talked to lawyers about their odds for getting a waiver the old-fashioned way. So I'm not totally surprised. I kind of thought once he went in the portal last month, it was probably a done deal. There was that sliver of a door that he might come back. Again, when last season ended, his family came out and said, we're not transferring right now. And so everyone thought he was going to play out the string and be a grad transfer after this coming season, when that would obviously give him immediate eligibility wherever. And he might stay and see what happened with Keaton Slovis. Would he get hurt? Would he get another chance? When he entered the portal, our sources told us it was driven by this potential for the NCAA one-time transfer exception with immediate eligibility. That, of course, did not go through. It's not going to be part of this year. It's kind of shelved for now. So at that point, we hadn't heard anything since then. We were waiting for an announcement from him one way or the other. I'm not totally surprised, but it's huge news for sure.
Well, you know the lay of the landscape down here. It was just a couple years ago that you were covering the Florida Gators.
Yes.
And before the end of this conversation, we're going to ask you about the Florida Gators, because once a Florida Gators beat writer, always a Florida Gator. I know you know what's going on, but the choice of Georgia, and I know that you know enough to know that they've gotten Jamie Newman, the Wake Forest graduate transfer. They've gotten Dwan Mathis, the redshirt freshman, former Ohio State commit. They have Carson Beck, a true freshman out of Jacksonville. It would seem to be a Vandergriff, a five-star commit in 2021. It would seem to be a pretty full house. So why would JT Daniels choose Georgia? What take us into his mind, if you could project, knowing him, knowing his skill set, what might he be seeing in Georgia?
So when you say, am I surprised, here's where I'm surprised and where I'm not surprised. I thought he would end up at a top program, a chance to compete for a national championship. I know that's important to him. That's why he came to USC. So that he's at a caliber of program as Georgia does not surprise me. Everything else you mentioned, the depth chart, the QB room there, having Vandergriff coming in, having Newman getting all this hype already, that does surprise me a little bit. And that goes back to the unknown of what the pitch was from Georgia and what they told him. He's not afraid of competition. So I'm not saying that he was told, hey, you're going to be our guy in 2021 or whatever. I don't think he was given any assurances, but he had to like what he heard about his chances. And then I think he's just trusting himself that, hey, I went to USC as a true freshman to beat out two older guys. Granted, not on the caliber of Newman and Vandergriff. I won a competition again last year for my job with a new staff. I've been through this process before. I can go in and compete and win. Personally, I did think he would end up at a program, a top program, but one that was in more desperate need of a quarterback. I thought he would find a landing spot where it was pretty cleared out and, hey, you're our guy. I can't see that being what Georgia could tell him, but ultimately I think he just evaluated, this place really wants me and I can truly compete for a national title here.
Let's back up. We've talked about the hot button topics. We've talked about the breaking news, what's happened, the immediacy of now. Let's get a little bit more depth into JT Daniels. You had a chance to cover this young man, a five-star prospect out of Mater Dei. I believe he was the third highest rated quarterback in his class, behind Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. So tell us about this guy. He came into a program where there were two older quarterbacks, and he was able to win that job. Tell us about JT the person and JT the quarterback.
Well, he had a monster season at Mater Dei, which is a national power right down the road from USC. And that started the hype train rolling along well before he ever got to campus. He reclassified to graduate a year early. So he didn't get to come in for a spring and have all this buildup. He got here in the summer, and even though he was just arriving and was a true freshman, graduating a year early, everybody thought he was going to win the job, and he was almost preordained as the next great USC quarterback at a program that's obviously had a string of incredible history at that position. So there was a lot of weight, a lot of pressure on his shoulders coming in, where everyone thought, "Hey, he's going to be a star from day one." It didn't happen, and the fan base, many fans, quickly turned on him and said, "Hey, this isn't what we thought we were getting with this guy. He's not a 5-star. He's not this and that." He walked into a tough situation where their offense was a mess. They would end up stripping play calling from T. Martin halfway through the season. He would leave after the season, and it was clear that. I mean, I'm not saying Daniels didn't have his inconsistencies, ups and downs, but to say that he was the problem for that offense is not fair. Over the second half of that season, game after game, he would be lights out for the first half of a game, and the offense would just shut down after halftime. And the general conclusion you would draw from that is that the staff wasn't making adjustments, was getting out coached. And it just wasn't a good offense. So coming into last year, new offensive coordinator Graham Harrell, I thought, man, this is a perfect fit for JT's skill set. He's highly accurate. He makes quick decisions. That's why he kept winning these competitions, because in practice he was the most decisive every time. And he's going to be the perfect fit for this air raid offense. And sure enough, in the first half of the season opener, he throws 34 passes, completes 28 or whatever, throws for over 200 yards. And I'm seeing this is exactly what I expected. He's going to have a monster season in this offense. He gets an awful bad break. Tears his ACL and meniscus in the second quarter of that season opener. And no one could have predicted that Keaton Slovis, a 3-star prospect from Arizona, who had gotten no hype coming in, had started to build some hype in the spring and fall camp, takes that opportunity, and Wally Pips, JT, goes on to have a record-setting season for a USC freshman quarterback. And it just left JT in a really tough position where he's still as talented as he was. He's still as great of a fit for the offense as he was. But they just had a guy throw for 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 9 picks. You get better and better and better each week. There was no way they were not going to let Keaton Slovis build on what he did. Now, they paid lip service and said all the right things, that we're going to have a competition. JT will get a chance to compete for the job. But there's no logical scenario where he could have created any kind of gap large enough in fall camp to say, okay, yeah, we're going back and we're going to put Keaton on the bench again. It wasn't going to happen. So the writing was on the wall. It's very unfortunate. It's not a reflection of his potential or what he could have done here. I think he could have had close to the season that Keaton had last year. I don't know if it would have been the same, but I think if not for that injury, we're talking about JT Daniels is indeed that next star quarterback at USC. That opportunity just got taken away from him.
Yeah, no doubt. And what Slovis did, you can't underscore that enough. I mean, how unprecedented, and as you said, came out of left field, a 3-star. Yeah. As far as evaluating JT and his abilities, when we talked earlier today, you told me you thought maybe he had a little bit better mobility than Jake Fromm, but this is not a dual threat quarterback. But I'll let you share your observations as far as arm strength, accuracy, pocket poise. How would you break him down as you evaluated his skill set?
Yeah, definitely not a dual threat quarterback. Coming off his freshman season, I think he realized he had to improve in that way. And it was impressive. He transformed his body. He came in just looking much more athletic, tightened up, slimmed down. And he talked at length about the process he went through. And it was really intense that he realized that he physically wasn't ready for that first season to the degree he wanted to be. So he came out in that first game. We only saw 2 quarters, but I saw a little more escapability. I saw a little more mobility and elusiveness. So I think he was improving in that way, but that's never going to be his strength. His strength, again, is being decisive, scanning the field quickly, and making confident decisions on where he wants to go with the ball. He's not going to freeze. Now, there were times during his freshman year where it looked like he was locking in too much on his number 1 target. But he's a true freshman quarterback. He's a guy who graduated a year early. You expect that to be part of the maturation process, that you're not going to come out the gates and have every flaw corrected. I think that he would have gotten past that because what he showed in high school was decisiveness and scanning the field and throwing all over the place. I think we saw enough of that here that he was going to do that. You mentioned arm strength. I wouldn't say he has the biggest arm in the world. Yet their offense in 2018, part of the problem was that it pretty much boiled down to a lot of deep shots downfield and hoping that they would complete them because they couldn't get the running game going. They weren't being creative enough to get the intermediate passing game going. That wasn't on him totally. It was the offense. And so they threw a lot of deep balls, and I do think he left a lot of them short or off the mark. So that's an area that I'd want to see how he progresses and matures moving forward. I wouldn't say that's his absolute strength. I'd say his strength is accuracy and spreading the ball around and being quick with his decisions and really dominating in that intermediate passing game.
So he's a pre-snap read guy, kind of like Jake Fromm, a guy that kind of gets out of trouble before he gets in trouble with the pre-snap read. Good football IQ.
He's a very cerebral quarterback. He gets a lot of credit for his pre-snap assessment and awareness and kind of knowing what to expect coming into that play.
Now, here's a guy, though, Ryan. You mentioned he kind of transformed his body, became more athletic, and yet still can't get out of the first half of the opener in the Pac-12. You've been out there now long enough to be able to assess the Pac-12 versus the SEC. Is there a concern that JT Daniels may not translate in an athletic conference like the SEC, or do you believe that he is cerebral enough, like Jake Fromm, to stay out of trouble before he gets in trouble?
Yeah, I think he has all the physical tools and ability. That's not a concern to me. Also, bear in mind that USC's offensive line was far from a strength last year, and there was a missed block on that play. Certainly, there was also a misidentification on his part about the blitz coming. So there was shared responsibility. But the offensive lineman who let that guy through felt very guilty after the game and put a lot on him that had happened. So that's just a bad play that broke down. I don't think it speaks to a larger concern moving forward. He's going to play behind a great offensive line at Georgia. I think that will only further accentuate what he does well.
I want to dig a little bit deeper into the decision of JT Daniels to transfer to Georgia. We're talking with Ryan Young from the Rivals Network. He's our football expert. Ryan is a well-traveled veteran journalist that knows college football from every perspective. And living out there in Southern California, I want to ask you the COVID-19 question because, I'm here in Georgia where things are quite liberated in terms of the state being open, numbers going down. The reports we see on television is that the Los Angeles mayor has said no events the rest of this year into January. I'm not sure where that stands right now, but what is it like living in Los Angeles? What is the COVID-19 circumstance? And could that have played any role in JT's decision wanting to come somewhere else than maybe Southern California where things do seem a little bit more on lockdown?
I would say it played no role whatsoever. But to answer the question, it definitely is different here. I actually had to go back east for some business earlier this month, and it's noticeably different how shut down LA still is, how much is still closed, and how everyone's still treating it. There was a greater fear, I'd say, 2 or 3 weeks ago among fans here that, man, is the Pac-12, is California going to open behind the rest of college football? That's been allayed a good bit. California Governor Gavin Newsom came out a week and a half ago and said we can have pro sports here with no fans starting in June. The Pac-12 announced a couple of days ago that following the lead of the rest of the Power 5 conferences that they can have the voluntary on-campus stuff starting June 15th. So the dominoes seem to be falling in line, and everyone I've talked to at USC is very optimistic about playing an on-time full season. So I think some of those concerns about USC and California and the Pac-12 being behind the rest of the country are starting to go to the wayside. But it's a fair question, and we really haven't heard from LA Mayor Eric Garcetti subsequent to the Pac-12 announcement on this, and we don't know if that's going to be a roadblock. USC didn't come out with its own announcement right after the Pac-12 did, which means that there's still some stuff being discussed and worked out behind the scenes. So it's a fair question. I just don't think it played a role into JT's decision at all.
You mentioned your thoughts, Ryan, that you thought he may go to a school a little bit more desperate for a quarterback where he could get plugged in right away. There was a lot of negativity on Twitter. The Tennessee fans reacted pretty negatively to this and, questioning Kirby Smart's ability to develop a quarterback. Apparently he missed the last 3 SEC championship games. But are you a little surprised that he didn't go to Tennessee where there is a Jim Chaney and a coach that he's familiar with T. Martin?
No, I can't speak to how JT feels about T. Martin, but again, that would be ironic if he ended up there, given that he went through a very tough freshman season in a T. Martin offense that was widely panned and criticized for not putting his people in the right position. Now he's not the play caller there, so it's different. But no, that doesn't surprise me. Again, yeah, Tennessee's on a nice surge here with their recruiting efforts and some late season mojo from last year, but they're not on the caliber of where Georgia is right now. And I think that JT sees himself as the leader of a program that's going to compete for a national title. I think he wants to be immediately in that mix and conversation. And so again, he's at the kind of program I thought he would be at. I just have the same intrigue and questions you do about the depth chart and then the crowded QB room he's walking into and what his thought process was through all that. And we won't know that until we hear from him, I guess.
I've made a few trips out there and seen some football at Arizona State and Oregon and certainly USC. Ryan, what's been your takeaway on Pac-12 football? It's been a while since we've seen the Pac-12 in the college football playoff. It looks like Oregon this year may pose a serious threat. But in terms of being a former SEC beat guy at Florida and kind of comparing your travels in the Pac-12 to what you saw in the SEC, the talent level, the style of football, what is the takeaway of Pac-12 versus SEC?
Well, I think that everyone would acknowledge the SEC is a little bit different level. I think it's reflected in the number of draft picks. It's reflected in the teams in the college football playoff and national rankings. I think all that stuff's an accurate gauge. But Pac-12 football is still very good. There's still a lot of good players in this conference, and Oregon's really on the come up and an impressive program with what they're building. I think you're going to find USC very much back in the national picture here in the next year or two based on the changes they've made. So I think the Pac-12 is what it's always been. It's not going to have the national reputation of the SEC, and that's probably deserved based on what it produces. But I don't think it's lagging that far behind, personally.
Your view from 10,000 feet, USC is scheduled to play against Alabama this year in Arlington, Texas. So you've probably taken some time to look at the Crimson Tide. That's probably been a lot of talk of the offseason. Are you among those that believe the Crimson Tide will be representing the SEC in the college football playoff, or do you see some holes in this Nick Saban team?
I think they have a lot of questions to answer still. And the intrigue out here is who's going to be the quarterback, because obviously USC had Bryce Young committed for over a year, and he was going to be that next guy behind J.T. Daniels. He was the future of this program, and he flips to Alabama. We'll see if he can beat out the older quarterback there and get that shot. But that's the main intriguing question here. I haven't broken down their national title hopes that thoroughly. Obviously, you just kind of give the benefit of the doubt to Nick Saban and assume that whatever holes are there are going to be filled in a way that puts them in that conversation again.
You know, certainly that's the SEC West. And in the East, I know we said earlier we would talk a little Georgia, Florida. I know you keep up with the Gators a little bit and what Dan Mullen has done there. What are your thoughts about where Florida is? I'm starting to see some of the national media predicting that Florida overtakes Georgia this year.
Yeah, I think that they feel there's an opening there this year to maybe turn the tables a little bit in that series from the last couple of years. There's a lot of excitement about Kyle Trask, which is interesting. When Dan Mullen took over there, I had already been through a lot of Felipe Franks, and I thought, man, he's going to come in and be the one that gives Kyle Trask a chance. And it didn't happen right away. I was really surprised that it wasn't a more open situation there, that he didn't get a chance earlier, because I thought all along that Felipe Franks was kind of a limited ceiling capped quarterback. Now, granted, he had a great season in Dan's first year there, but he's a guy that I always worried about in big games. And is he going to make the critical turnover? Is he going to do this and that? And you see them now make the full transition to Kyle Trask and what he did last year. I think there's a lot of excitement there. And there's a lot of intrigue for me, kind of having followed the origins of their arrivals and his whole storyline, to see him now get this chance. It's a great story. It's one of the great stories in college football. A guy who wasn't a starter for his high school team, who comes in with a more highly ranked quarterback, sits behind him for several years, and finally gets the chance in the spotlight to see what he can do with it. So very intrigued. You got to be hugely impressed with what Dan Mullen's done there the last couple of years. I think that whatever the expectation was, he's met it or exceeded it. Obviously, the next step is beating your rivals and getting the upper hand on Georgia, and not falling into a situation where, like Jim Harbaugh is at with Ohio State, where every year it's to the point where, well, great, you had a great season, but you lost Ohio State again. Certainly for the Florida fans, they have to show that they can compete with and beat Georgia on any given year for the next step of this Dan Mullen evolution to happen.
Presuming that JT Daniels gets the waiver and that he's healthy enough to play. Now, I would think that the recovery window is such, this happened in the opener last September. I would think the recovery window is such that he's capable of playing. Ryan, do you get the feeling that he's coming with playing this year in mind versus sitting out a year?
It's really hard to answer because I can see the logic both ways. I can see if he thinks that, you know what, it might be good for my knee to recover for an extra year. They have Newman this year, but he's in his last year. He's going to clear the way. And if I get here with a year to kind of lay the foundation for me taking that job, that benefits me as opposed to staying at USC one more year, knowing I'm probably going to transfer anyway, and then going in and having a limited window to seize a job. If he's convinced himself that, man, going to Georgia is the best avenue for my college football career, and whatever happens this year, I have a year to position myself for 2021, I could totally see that being the logic for him. But he's also a highly competitive guy, and I can also see him saying, we're going to do everything we can to convince the NCAA that I deserve a waiver, and I'm going to go compete with this guy. And I'm as good as this guy, and I'm going to compete with him. So I can see it both ways, and until we hear from him, it's just really hard to say because, again, everyone here was curious and waiting to hear where JT and his family stood after that one-time waiver was not going to be granted. And we didn't really hear anything, and this kind of comes. So that tells me that he had already convinced himself, you know what, no matter what, I need to get somewhere and get positioned for the rest of my career.
You've been doing this a long time, Ryan. Give me your beat writer gut feel, scale of 1 to 10, that JT Daniels will be starting a football game for Georgia in the next 2 seasons.
8.5.
8.5, that at some point he will start at the University of Georgia quarterback.
My gut feel would be that he waits this year, either waiting for eligibility or waiting behind Newman, and comes in 2021 and wins that competition and tries to hold off Vandegrift as long as he can.
That's interesting. You know, current guys on campus, we'll have to see what happens with Dwan Mathis, Carson Beck, Jamie Newman. Kirby Smart said earlier today he's not settled with this offense. That does provide a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. Should Daniels get the eligibility, if Kirby's not settled with these quarterbacks at this point, you got to wonder. And if they're going to go back to my understanding, Ryan, middle of July, I know that we're talking about workouts and different programs at different times. Hell, Nebraska's back June 1st, right? Georgia and the SEC June 8th. You mentioned the Pac-12. I believe the Big 12 as well, June 15th, with the exception of Oklahoma, July 1st. And yet still I'm hearing uniform football start date, mid-July, quarantine conditions for 2 weeks, and maybe a 6-week camp. How well do you think these teams can get prepared? Are you a believer that if these kids get back on campus now here in the next week or two and have those 6 weeks, that they will be adequately prepared for the season? Or do you have some concerns about the level of play we'll see and the potential for injury?
No, I think that's going to manifest into some more sloppiness than you'd see otherwise. And I really feel for the programs that are bringing in new coaches and new systems. I think they're going to be way behind. There's just no way to make up that time. And, you know, for USC, they have a new defensive coordinator. They have a whole new defensive staff. So we're seeing it here. That's a big concern. That was the big intrigue of the offseason is, this defensive staff is going to make the same impact the offense did last year. And now they've got to really get everything in a shorter period of time. I've talked to the coaches, and they dismiss it and say, well, you know, we'll put in what the kids are ready for. If we have to go with a smaller package, that's what we'll do. But you have to imagine that there is a pronounced difference between having a traditional rollout to the season and having a shortened 6-week build-up. But it's gonna manifest into some things you would not otherwise see on the field. I think the programs that have an established system and established identity are going to be the ones that benefit the most.
Sounds like a lot of points when USC and Alabama meet, with both those programs having some defensive issues.
Right.
Sounds like JT Daniels has a promising future at Georgia. Ryan, tell people where they can find your work on Twitter and on the Rivals Network.
Yeah, I'm at trojansports.com is our site, the USC Rivals site, and I'm at Ryan Young Rivals on Twitter.
Great stuff. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us tonight in this special presentation. The drop of a hat, man, is one of the great things about the sports writing business. We got a pretty big network, and I enjoyed working with you at SEC Country. Your work on the Florida beat was phenomenal, and you're still killing it out there, bringing that SEC intensity to the USC beat, man. Thanks so much for coming on today.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you.
All right, you got it. Ryan Young, there he is from the Rivals Network, tells you everything you need to know about JT Daniels. That's about as thorough of a scouting report as you can possibly get. We're going to wrap it up here. I'd like to thank my producer, Michael Carvel, for producing this show. We did a Dog Nation cover 4 earlier where myself, Connor Riley, Jeff Santel, and Brandon Adams, we discussed this, tried to hit it from every conceivable angle. Only Kirby Smart knows, and for all we know, maybe it has yet to be determined. We'll just have to see this and how it turns out. Everybody have a safe and wonderful Thursday night. Thanks for joining us.